consider buying a Stars and Stripes Freedom deck to support my educational series, available from La Loteria Loca. Download and archive these chapters, or rip them off the site you are viewing them on, and save them while you can, just in case this current channel gets shut down for covering any of these topics. Before we begin, keep in mind the vocabulary and vernacular written in this book was common practice from a different time in our history. If you are sensitive to the use of such language, you will completely miss the message and the hard work that Manning Johnson sacrificed for the improvement and safety of our country. Our nation has been manipulated by utilizing division in our communities by Marxist ideology.
As early as 1928, the communists declared that the racial differences among our people constituted the weakest and most vulnerable point in our social fabric. By constantly probing and straining at this one spot, they calculated that eventually the cloth could be torn apart and that Americans could be divided, weakened, and perhaps even set against each other in open combat. We mustn't kid ourselves into thinking that the communists have placed their agitators only into the black communities. They're working both sides of the street. They want hatred, violence, and bloodshed between the races, and they don't care how they get it or whom they use, even children if necessary. Here is a book that I think ought to be in every home library. It's entitled Color, Communism, and Common Sense by Manning Johnson. He joined the party as a young man because he honestly believed that the communists were trying to improve the conditions of his people. He was a dedicated communist, and eventually he rose to one of the highest ranks. But after many years, he discovered that instead they were merely planning to use his people in a bloody revolution to destroy America. And when he woke up to this, he dropped out of the party and devoted the rest of his life trying to alert his fellow citizens of all races to the true nature of the Communist Party as he knew it to be from the inside.
In modern literature, anti-communists are generally pictured as scoundrels. On the other hand, left-wing perjurers and jailbirds are shown as persecuted lambs. But there is a special vitriol uncorked for those who have followed communism and have repented to such an extent that they are publicly willing to stand up and testify against it by word and deed. The writer of this pamphlet, Manning Johnson, is an example of such treatment. The Supreme Court of the United States used a communist statement in a decision of the majority opinion, as delivered by Justice Felix Frankenfurter, to brand Manning Johnson as giving tainted testimony and cited as a basis for this statement the Communist Party brief. The left-wing papers, including the New York Herald Tribune, joyfully took up the cry. Of course, careful investigation shows that Manning Johnson is not a perjurer, and it would be easy to prove this in any court not dominated by such a character as Felix Frankenfurter. Manning Johnson's story begins very much like other Negroes brought up in a religious home. He was inducted into the party largely because of the preachings of a communist bishop retired of the Episcopal Church, William Montgomery Brown. Manning Johnson is a man of ability and education and felt himself frustrated by his race and color and fell under the spell of the communist propaganda. The communists, however, reckoned without understanding that the man they had enlisted in their cause had, for them, certain dangerous qualities. He had a Christian upbringing, he was intelligent, and he had courage. His Christian upbringing made him revolt at the obscene immorality of the Communist Party and its members. His intelligence made him see through the stupidity of the communist doctrine and see that he should strive to be a first-class Negro instead of an imitation of a third-class white man. His courage made him willing to confess his sins in public and try to expiate them. It is for this last quality that the Frankenfurter Supreme Court and the left-wing press can never forgive him. I hope you will read Manning Johnson's pamphlet carefully. If you do, you will understand how the communists have used and are using certain American Negroes to the detriment of all Americans, white or black. You will read the story of one Negro who has gone through the fire and come out tempered steel. July 22, 1958, Archibald B. Roosevelt, President of the Alliance, Inc. Chapter 1. In the Web. 10 years I labored in the cause of communism. I was a dedicated comrade. All my talent and efforts were zealously used to bring about the triumph of communism in America and throughout the world. To me, the end of capitalism would mark the beginning of an indeterminable period of plenty, peace, prosperity, and universal comradeship. All racial and class differences and conflicts would end forever after the liquidation of the capitalists, their government, and their supporters. A world union of Soviet states under the hegemony of Russia would free and lead mankind onto utopia. Being an idealist, I was sold this bill of goods by a Negro graduate of the Lenin Institute in Moscow. The color of one's skin is no bar to a young man or woman dreaming of making a better world. Like other Negroes, I experienced and saw many injustices and inequities around me based upon color, not ability. I was told that the decadent capitalist system is responsible, that mass pressure could force concessions, but that just prolongs the life of capitalism, that I must unite and work with all those who more or less agree that capitalism must go. Little did I realize, until I was deeply enmeshed in the Red Conspiracy, that just and seeming grievances are exploited to transform idealism into a cold and ruthless weapon against the capitalist system, that this is an end toward which all the communists' efforts among Negroes are directed. Indeed, I had entered the Red Conspiracy in the vain belief that it was the way to a new, better, and superior world system of society. 10 years later, thoroughly disillusioned, I abandoned communism. The experiences of those years in outer darkness are like a horrible nightmare. I saw communism in all its naked cruelty, ruthlessness, and utter contempt for Christian attributes and passions. And too, I saw the low value placed upon human life, the total lack of respect for the dignity of man, the betrayal of trust, the terror of the secret police, and the bloody hand of the assassin during and since those fateful years when I embraced communism. I was lured into the Red Movement by way of the American Negro Labor Congress, one of many front organizations set up by the communists to trap the naive, unwary, unsuspecting, and idealistic Negro. The use of such attractive and appealing fronts as a means of entrapment is a most important serpentine method of the Reds. After 2 years of practical training in organizing street demonstrations, inciting mob violence, how to fight the police, and how to politically throw a brick and hide, I was ready, in the opinion of my leaders, for a top communist school. At a secret national training school in New York City, I was given an extensive and intensive course in the theory and practice of Red political warfare. As a result, I was appointed district organizer by the political bureau of the Communist Party in the Buffalo, New York area, one of the vital industrial sections of our country. It was in the position of district organizer that I learned to use secret codes, mail drops, organize clandestine meetings, shake police shadows, and other underground activities. At the same time, I became acquainted with the nature of communist sabotage and espionage. My zeal, training, both theoretical and practical, combined with loyalty and willingness to sacrifice, changed me from a novice into a dedicated Red, a professional revolutionist. Consequently, I climbed rapidly to the National Committee, the highest governing body of the Communist Party in America. Being a Negro top communist, I was placed on the National Negro Commission, an important subcommittee of the National Committee of the Communist Party. On this commission, which was created on direct orders from Moscow to facilitate the subversion of the Negroes, I began to realize the full implication of how the Negro is used as a political dupe by the Kremlin hierarchy, under the guise of unity of black and white in the struggle. Several top white communists, such as James S. Allen, Elizabeth Lawson, the late Robert Bob Minor, and George Blake Charney, were placed on the National Negro Commission. These white communists wielded more power than the nominal Negro heads of the commission. In a word, they were like white overseers. Every Negro member was aware of the fact that these white overseers constituted the eyes, the ears, and the voice of the Kremlin. Moreover, these white overseers are the surest functional guarantee of the maintenance of the hierarchical authoritarian control of the Kremlin over their Negro lickspittles, directing the conspiracy among Negroes in America. Indeed, it is the white group on the National Negro Commission that holds full sway. They flatter one or two top Negroes by making them feel they are actually participating in the formulation of policy by consulting with them prior to meetings of the Commission. Then these two Negroes are assigned to lay down the line to the other Negroes on the Commission. The white members check to make sure that they do. Their opinion of what a Negro member says at a meeting can either make or break him. Usually, the Negro who is broken is accused of petty bourgeois nationalism, that is, placing the interests of the Negro above the interests of the Communist Party. In this connection, I observed how the white women communists are used as political prostitutes, cohabiting with high-level Negro communists in order to spy on them. Through such intimate relations, these white women communists are able to elicit information pertaining to family background, sources of income, marital difficulties, arrests, convictions, opinions on the communist policy and communist leadership. This information is invaluable to the red hierarchy in their relations with their Negro lickspittles. In the top red circles, this is known as bedroom politics. White communist women are also used to maneuver top Negro reds into compromising positions that, if revealed, would result in public scandal or disgrace. In this way, the Reds make these Negroes permanently subject to blackmail if they ever consider leaving the Red movement. Moreover, this information is used to destroy the credibility of the defectee should he decide to fight the Red conspiracy. The highest position I attained was candidate for the Political Bureau, or Politburo, of the Communist Party. The Politburo is a small, close-knit body carefully selected by the Kremlin hierarchy. Each member holds his position solely on the approval of the reactionary, rapacious despoilers in the Kremlin. This is the real governing body of the entire Red conspiracy in America. A candidate is invited to sit on the deliberations with voice but no vote. Usually, a representative of the Kremlin participates in all meetings and deliberations of the Politburo. This writer sat in such meetings when Gerhard Heisler, alias Edwards, Brown, Hansberger, etc., was the Kremlin representative. Eisler later jumped bail and fled the United States on the red Porsche liner Batory after he was exposed and convicted of passport fraud. The assignment of political commissaries to the Red movement in America is not limited solely to America, but is an established Kremlin policy in relation to all communist parties in countries outside of the Iron Curtain. Kremlin agents, such as Eisler, exercise an awesome power over the white as well as black lickspittles comprising the leadership. When Eisler spoke, one could hear a pin fall. Each leader sat in rapt attention, hanging on to every word Eisler uttered, as if it were indeed a pronouncement from the Holy of Holies. On several occasions, he expressed the grave dissatisfaction of the Kremlin because of the failure of the party to take advantage of the broad People's Front movement to build progressive groups in participating organizations such as the NAACP, youth, religious, fraternal, labor, etc. These progressive groups, he said, was the only guarantee that the decisions we make with leaders will be brought down to and carried out by the membership. Significantly, Eisler emphasized that the People's Front, or Democratic Front, is a maneuver only to lay the basis for firm communist direction and control of masses, and two, that the leaders of the non-communist organizations are drawn into joint movements with the communists only to facilitate the infiltration, ideological, and organizational penetration of their respective organizations. After all, this is a fight for leadership to determine who shall lead the masses, the communists or Negro reformists. The progressive groups, consisting of communists, fellow travelers, sympathizers, liberals, etc., constitute the vehicle on which the Reds pin their present hope of victory. Never once were we allowed to forget the vacillating, uncertain, untrustworthy character of the Negro intellectual, the Negro minister, the Negro petty bourgeois, the Negro reformist, and the white socio-liberal, philanthropic, humanitarian supporter. They are accused on the basis of experience of running frantically from one camp, red, to the other, capitalist, when the going gets tough. So that when communists unite with and support them today, it is necessary to keep in mind that it may be necessary to denounce them tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow hang them. Thus, as a participant on the highest level of the communist conspiracy in America, I observed the cold, calculating, ruthless nature of red power politics and political warfare, stripped of all its illusory propaganda and idealistic cover.
Ideological subversion is the process which is legitimate, overt, and open. You can see it with your own eyes. All you have to do, all American mass media has to do, is to unplug their bananas from their ears, open up their eyes, and they can see it. There is no mystery. There is nothing to do with espionage. I know that espionage intelligence gathering looks more romantic. It sells more deodorants through the advertising, probably. That's why your Hollywood producers are so crazy about James Bond type of thrillers. But in reality, the main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. According to my opinion and opinion of many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages.
Chapter 2. Subverting Negro Churches. Created doubt, lack of confidence, suspicion, setting up situations that bring about racial bitterness, violence, and conflict, putting forth demands so unrealistic that race relations are worsened, attacking everybody in disagreement as reactionaries, fascists, Ku Kluxers among whites, and Uncle Toms among Negroes, constitute the Reds' pattern of operation. Fortunately, the overwhelming majority of Negroes, in whose name the Communists and their ilk presume to speak, have not fallen for the blandishments of the Reds. They know a red light when they see one. The same cannot be said of many Negro intellectuals carrying the ball for the Communists, since the Communists have always looked upon Negro intellectuals as shallow, superficial, phasemongers, and incompetents, looking for a loaf when they, on a basis of ability, are not worthy of a crumb. Their pro-communist behavior becomes all the more tragic and ludicrous. Only after the order came from Moscow in the 1934-35 period to win over the Negro intellectual by deceptive flattery and adulation did the Reds' public attitude toward them change. The Kremlin concluded that these superficial phonies could serve the cause of communism. A large number of Negro ministers are all for the communists. Some are prominent and influential. Others are run-of-the-mill. They in common believe that beating the racial drum is a shortcut to prominence, money, and the realization of personal ambitions, even if the Negro masses are left prostrate and bleeding, expendables in the mad scramble for power. Abner W. Berry, columnist in the Daily Worker, official organ of the Communist Party, recently praised these ministers as fulfilling their historic role, i.e., delivering the Negro into the hands of the Communists. Neither his pen nor his lips had such praise prior to the 1934-35 period. Then the Moscow line was clear. The resolution on the Negro question stated,
"In the work among the Negroes, special attention should be paid to the role played by the churches and preachers who are acting on behalf of American imperialism. The party must conduct a continuous and carefully worked out campaign among Negro masses, sharpened primarily against the preachers and the churchmen, who are the agents of the oppressors of the Negro race."
All the instructions from Moscow at the time ordered Reds to combat the influence of the church, because the church, by offering the Negro worker and peasant for the miseries they are enduring in this world, compensation in heaven, are befogging the minds of the Negro workers and peasants, making them a helpless prey to capitalism and imperialism. The public denunciation of Negro sky politics was likewise stopped on orders from Moscow. The deeply religious Negro masses, whom the Kremlin wanted to use as expendables in the struggle for power, shied away from the party. A frontal attack on religion resulted in isolation from Negroes, therefore deception was to be tried. The honeyed phrase replaced harsh words. The smile replaced the smirk. The velvet glove covered the mailed fist. Humility replaced arrogance. The handshake replaced hostility. All that was distasteful and wicked in the past was to be forgotten in the face of a need for a common front against the white oppressors. The devil was sick. An angel he would be. Application of the new line embarked the Communists on an era of outstanding success in infiltrating and penetrating the Negro church. White ministers acting as missionaries, using the race angle as bait, aided in the cultivation of Negro ministers for work in the Red solar system of organizations. Bribery through gifts, paid lectures, flattery through long applause at staged rallies, favorable mention in the Red-controlled press were not the only methods employed to corrupt the Negro ministers. The use of sex and perversion as a means of political blackmail was an accepted Red tactic. At the same time that all this was going on at the top, the comrades were building cells below in the church to guarantee that decisions made at the top would be brought down to the congregation. The importance attached to this work is clearly shown in the report of the speeches of Earl Browder, then General Secretary of the Communist Party, and Gerard Eisler, alias Edwards, Moscow representative to the plenary session of the National Committee of the Communist Party in the United States. It states,
Comrades Browder, Edwards, and Ford have spoken about the necessity of making a turn in our Negro work, how to connect ourselves with the organized masses. In the United States there are, of the Negro population, 10 million in churches. The problem of how to penetrate these organizations is of the utmost political importance.
The bulk of the Negro church members are in the South. They live by the good book. Anyone against the good book is of the devil. There is no in-between. The red carpetbaggers discovered this when they touched the Negro's religion, so they avoided this sore spot in order to snare their intended victims. Get them involved in the movement first, and later do the job on their religious convictions was the order. Anything else was putting the cart before the horse. The new line went like this.
Jesus, the carpenter, was a worker like the communists. He was against the money changers, the capitalists, the exploiters of that day. That is why he drove them from the temple. The communists are the modern-day fighters against the capitalists or the money changers. If Jesus were living today, he would be persecuted like the communists who seek to do good for the common people.
Law enforcement agents made it extremely difficult and hazardous for the Reds to work openly. Consequently, they drew heavily upon accumulated knowledge and experience of their comrades engaged in illegal work in other parts of the world to operate with the least risk in the South. Of all their methods used, it was generally agreed that the church is the best cover for illegal work. Gilbert Green, one of the top Reds in this country, reported as follows.
For example, in the South we have more than 300 members who are also members of the church youth organizations, especially the Baptist Young People's Union. In this district, Alabama, where possible, we should build units in the church youth organizations. Why? Because in the South, especially for the Negro youth, the church is the center of cultural and social activity. It is here that we must work. By building our units in the church organizations, we can also improve our work under the illegal conditions, as it will be easier to work in the church organizations. In Alabama, there are certain places in which we can, in a short while, take over the church organizations of youth under our leadership, and these can become legal covers for our work in the South.
Father, please walk with us through the bad times as well as the good. May we be heard and understood from the suburbs to the hood. May you judge us by our hearts and not by our mistakes. And see that we get our breakthrough, however long that it takes. May you fill that void in our souls. We'll lay our fears to rest. But there's no way we can live for Jesus when we're living in the flesh. So I pray that you allow our spirits to be born, grow strong, move on, know right from wrong. 1 John chapter 2, verse 15. Do not love the world or anything in the world. We know what that means, but listen.
Chapter 3. Red Plot to Use Negroes. Stirring up race and class conflict is the basis of all discussion of the Communist Party's work in the South. The evil genius, Stalin, and other megalomaniacal leaders in Moscow ordered the use of all racial, economic, and social differences, no matter how small or insignificant, to start local fires of discontent, conflict, and revolt. Who could tell which of these issues could start a general conflagration that would sweep across the former Confederate states from Maryland to Texas? Black rebellion was what Moscow wanted. Bloody racial conflict would split America. During the confusion, demoralization and panic would set in. Then finally, the Reds say,
Workers stop work. Many of them seize arms by attacking arsenals. Many had armed themselves before. Street fights become frequent. Under the leadership of the Communist Party, the workers organized revolutionary committees to be in command of the uprising. Armed workers seized the principal government offices, invade the residences of the president and his cabinet members, arrest them, declare old regime abolished, establish their own power.
The only fear of the white communist leaders was that as a result of their efforts, this black rebellion would break out before they were ready in the decisive industrial cities of the North. What if 1 or 5 million Negroes die in the abortive attempt to establish a Negro republic? Is not the advance of the cause worth it? A communist is not a sentimentalist. He does not grieve over the loss of life and the advancement of communism. This plot to use the Negroes as the spearhead or as expendables was concocted by Stalin in 1928, nearly 10 years after the formation of the World Organization of Communism. Prior to this time, the periodic Moscow gatherings did little more than pass resolutions. Any credits for the changes belongs, in the main, to a handful of Negro lickspittles like James W. Ford, Harry Haywood, Otto Hall, Lovett Fort Whitman, and Otto Hueswood, to mention a few. They were the ones who, again and again, begged their masters in Moscow to force the white leaders of the Communist Party in the United States to organize and use the Negroes. They were the ones who got in on the ground floor of the conspiracy. They are the ones that history may well record as the political Uncle Toms who plotted with a diabolical alien power the moral decay, physical slavery, and spiritual death of their own race. The perfidy of these Negro Reds is all the more infamous when one reads from the pen of a top Negro communist who wrote, A.
Prior to the Sixth Congress, white chauvinism,
or red prejudice,
made progress in Negro work well nigh impossible.
B.
White chauvinism manifests itself in open or concealed opposition and doing work among Negroes.
C.
The tendency was to ignore the leading Negro comrades when formulating policy.
D.
As punishment for their opposition, the Negro comrades were refused financial support in getting out the weekly news service, which was being sent out to some 300 Negro newspapers.
E.
Negro comrade was disciplined for his insistence in bringing before the conference the tabooed question of Negro work.
The above-read author gives James W. Ford credit for his bringing this matter to the attention of the white fathers in Moscow, which resulted in immediate action. Negro communists were given jobs in the apparatus. Most of them were given professional revolutionary training in the United States and Russia under direct orders from Stalin. As a result, Negro Reds began looking to Moscow. Stalin became the great and just father, who could be relied upon to settle the many differences between white and Negro communists. During the 3 decades which have elapsed since the Sixth World Congress in Moscow, the American Communist Party has conducted many campaigns and formed and infiltrated a large number of organizations among Negroes. From the bloody gun battles at Camp Hill, Alabama, 1931, to the present integration madness, the heavy hand of communism has moved, stirring up racial strife, creating confusion, hate, and bitterness so essential to the advancement of the Red cause. One may recall organizations formed, directed, controlled, and led by Reds and fellow travelers such as American Negro Labor Congress, League of Struggle for Negro Rights, International Labor Defense, National Negro Congress, Sharecroppers Union, the Civil Rights Congress, Negro Labor Victory Committee, Southern Negro Youth Congress, Negro Labor Councils, etc. Ad infinitum that exposed millions of Negroes to communist ideas. The list of sponsors, officers, and contributors reads like a who's who in the Negro intellectual, professional, labor, and religious circles. Through the aforementioned organizations and many others, Negro institutions of higher education like Howard University were penetrated to subvert teachers and students and thus politically contaminate the intellectual stream of Negro life. White leftists descended on Negro communities like locusts, posing as friends come to help liberate their black brothers. Along with these white communist missionaries came the Negro political Uncle Tom to allay the Negroes' distrust and fears of these strangers. Everything was interracial, and interracialism artificially created, cleverly devised as a camouflage of the Red plot to use the Negro.
I would agree that no doubt there have been a large number of whites who have posed as liberals and as friends of the Negro and who have time and again betrayed the Negro. On the other hand, I think one could point to a large number of whites who have struggled for civil rights, for equality, and have got little or nothing out of it, other than quite a few bruises.
Give me an example.
Well, the large number of white students who have gone into the South, for example, working for SNCC and other organizations.
Not working for SNCC or other organizations, but working for the white political machines who benefit by the voting efforts of Negroes.
Okay. I'll be more specific. I would cite Herbert Hill, for example, as a kind of person who has championed Negro job rights, for example, in New York City and elsewhere. He has fought the political machine.
First time I met Herbert Hill personally was when they were picketing to stop the working on the Harlem Hospital in Harlem. Negroes for 10 years had to fight the city to get an annex built on the Harlem Hospital. Because in Harlem we need a hospital more so than anything else. Our people are sick. Plus we do a lot of cutting and shooting of each other, though we profess to be nonviolent. And Herbert Hill brought his forces out and stopped the working on that site. This is the first time I ever saw him. Then when work was brought to a halt on a hospital in Harlem, the same Negroes tried to stop the work at the downstate medical center in Brooklyn, which is predominantly white. They were out there for 3 months during the summer. Couldn't stop anything. And I never saw Herbert Hill out there one time. Now, whenever it takes a stoppage of something that's going to affect the white man, you find the white liberal absent. But when it involves something that primarily will affect the best interests of black people, and black people only, then that white liberal is present. Herbert Hill is the labor secretary for the NAACP. Mm-hmm. And if he was interested in black people, he would prepare a black man with the type of knowledge and understanding of the labor troubles involving black people that would enable a black man to sit in the same position as Secretary of Labor or Labor Secretary in the NAACP. I'm suspicious of whites who join Negroes and always have to be in the lead, who always have to be the head, who always have to be at the top in Negro organizations. Those whites who really have the interest of blacks at heart, let them give some advice to some Negroes and stand on the sideline. But don't join the organization and then get at the head of it and pose as a friend of Negroes.
Chapter 4. Bane of Red Integration. Many Negro intellectuals, artists, professionals, etc. were carried away with this outburst of interracialism. Here was an opportunity to be accepted by the other racial group. Secretly, they had always wanted to get away from the other Negroes. Moving around among whites would somehow add to their stature and endow a feeling of importance. So they went after communists in racialism like a hog going after slop. There are numerous examples of the harmful and deadening effect of the communist interracialism integration on any proposal for constructive Negro projects. Of these examples, I will cite only a few. First, during the latter 1930s, the Negro and white Reds, fellow travelers, etc., all waged an intense campaign against Harlem Hospital in New York. Inside information supplied by Reds on the hospital staff told of crowded conditions and improper treatment. Some of this information was so derogatory that many dubbed Harlem Hospital the butcher shop. Street meetings, indoor rallies, United Front conferences made overcrowding and improper hospital treatment the main subject matter. Demands were made on the city officials for more and better hospitals without success. Charges of race discrimination filled the air. The Reds had a field day building up racial tensions. Everybody was talking about the overcrowding in the Harlem Hospital. So a group of Negroes, believing in doing something for yourself, came up with the idea of a Negro community effort to found a hospital. They saw in such a project a chance to render great service to the people and the community and to show the nation and the world an example of Negro resourcefulness. Jews, Catholics, Presbyterians, and others founded hospitals, so why not the Negroes? The communists were not interested in a Negro hospital founded by Negroes and redounding to their credit. Such a project would take away a key issue in racial agitation and radicalization and isolate the Reds. So they acted swiftly and decisively through their Negro intellectual tools in the community to kill the project aborting. The late Claude McKay, Negro poet, whom I knew very well, wrote about it as follows.
There was a project to found a Negro hospital a few years ago, but before it was launched, the idea was killed by the obstreperous and extremely vocal and effective group of Negro intellectuals who style themselves the anti-segregationists. They maintained that a Negro hospital would be an incentive to the greater segregation of Negro doctors. Preposterous is the situation in which the entire Negro minority is placed by its irrational intellectuals and their canny radical white supporters. I predict that nothing could be more effective in breaking down the barriers of segregation and compelling white doctors to recognize the merits of colored colleagues than the establishment of a great Negro hospital in Harlem. Moreover, such an institution could become an asset to the American medical profession. White doctors would be more attracted by the outstanding work of their colored colleagues, just as white educators and intellectuals were drawn to Tuskegee to study the great work of Booker T. Washington.
Second,
A well-known Negro real estate man called together a group of prominent Negro intellectuals and professionals for the purpose of launching a Negro housing development through the purchase of land and home construction. Such a project, he argued, would go a long way in showing the other races that Negroes can build ideal communities and maintain standards second to none. He had maps showing fine locations that even from a land purchase angle proved that it was a good investment. But he couldn't get to first base. Why? Because they were against setting up Negro communities, that is, segregating ourselves. They, he said, were all for integration in white communities.
third,
A prominent Negro dentist who became well-to-do in the Negro community takes great pride in his radical views and associations. He purchased a home in a white neighborhood for $20,000. He has since added approximately $10,000 for repairs and alterations. Publicly, he boasted about his being the only Negro family in the neighborhood. He makes his money off Negroes. He is a Negro, but he doesn't want to live among them. To him, the mark of success is a good bank reserve and a home in a white neighborhood. His only fear is that his white neighbors will sell to other Negroes and move to another area. To him, and to so many others of his ilk, the very thought of members of his own race replacing his newly found white neighbors gives him conniptions.
However, it makes no difference what are the circumstances. The Negro crasher of the lily white section is sure full of cooperation and aid of the Reds and all so-called progressives to beat down and discredit the opposition. Negro integrationists in the main can be placed in three groups as follows. A. Those who seek acceptance in white communities only for themselves to the complete exclusion of other Negroes. B. Those who are paid agents of unprincipled or racketeering white real estate men exploiting the anxieties and fears of the white community to reap a financial bonanza. C. Those who are blockbusters, that is, a Negro family for whom the Reds, or so-called progressives, have purchased or rented a home or an apartment with the full knowledge that its transfer is going to arouse social resentment, bitterness, and hostility. Regardless of the group into which the Negro integrationists falls, he is like the manna from heaven to all those who deliberately seek to arrest the steady advancement in race relations and turn it into shambles for alien or partisan political purposes. Significant it is to note that the Reds and so-called progressives never spend money on projects to help the Negroes unless these projects pay off in race conflict and animosity. They know that the blockbuster, like the interloper and party crashers, is always resented and usually gets a bum rush. That is why they seek to cast the Negro in such a light. It builds up hidden resentment that can be exploited. Some people describe New York City as a melting pot. At best, this is only wishful thinking. The numerous racial and national groups are as easily identified today as ever. The geographical areas where each group settled or resettled remains. Thus, there are in New York German sections, Italian sections, Irish sections, Jewish sections, Puerto Rican sections, Chinese sections, Negro sections, etc. In short, there may be found as many sections as there are national groups or races. National, social, cultural, linguistic, religious, and other common factors affect this sectional cleavage. Parades and gala affairs in national costumes are not uncommon. The same may be said of every part of our country. Though these national, racial, and religious differences divide them like 5 fingers on the hand, yet they are one solid fist as Americans. The communists try to exploit these national, racial, and religious differences in order to weaken, undermine, and subjugate America to Moscow. Like a serpent, they use guile to seduce each group. At no time have the communists even hinted or suggested to any group other than the Negro that their clannishness or tendency to colonize a given area creates a ghetto or quarters. Were they to do so, they would be jeered out of each section as crackpots. Evidently, the Reds had international propaganda in mind when they described Negro sections as ghettos, because the definition of the word ghetto in no way applies to a Negro section any more than it does to a German, Irish, Jewish, Chinese, or any other section in America. The Encyclopedia Britannica states, ghetto, formerly the street or quarter of a city in which Jews were compelled to live, enclosed by walls and gates which were locked each night. The term is now used loosely of any locality in a city or country where Jews congregate. During the Middle Ages, the Jews were forbidden to leave the ghetto after sunset when the gates were locked, and they were also imprisoned on Sundays and all Christian holy days. Negroes band together in sections like other races and national groups much for the same reasons. Like other racial and national groups, they can buy land, build communities, settle in any section of the country. Like other racial and national groups, they can make their sections as nice and as attractive as possible. The maximum business, cultural, sanitary, and other social services are within their reach as with other groups. The communists, through propaganda, have sold a number of Negro intellectuals the idea that the Negro section is a ghetto, that white Americans created it, set its geographical boundaries, that it is a product of race hate and the inhumanity of white Americans. Therefore, it is a struggle of Negro against white oppressors for emancipation. Naturally, those holding such views have no community pride, no interest in doing anything to improve its services because that would be aiding and abetting the segregation and maintenance of the ghetto. Moreover, they oppose any race project inside or outside of the Negro section for the same reason. Everything has to be integrated or it is taboo. In this way, they paralyze Negro initiative and resourcefulness, casting the race in the mold of one that is incapable of producing anything for the advancement of society. At the same time, it creates the impression among other racial groups that the Negro awaits for them to prepare the banquet so that he can step in and enjoy it. Obviously, this line, deliberately spread by the communists, leads to the worst kind of mischief. It strengthens and creates racial prejudices and lays the basis for sharp racial conflicts. Shirking social responsibility and blaming others may be the easy way, but it is only a shortcut to communist slavery.
The Crusader explains how to set up sniper units in crowded metropolitan areas, how to manufacture jumbo Molotov cocktails, the gallon jug size, and how to mix the gasoline with certain ingredients to make it burn like napalm, how to pour gasoline into utility manholes in the streets to set fire to the main telephone cables, how to put sulfur tips from matches into air conditioning units and blow up large buildings, how to ignite gas mains and oil storage tanks. It explains how radio-controlled model airplanes can be used to fly explosive charges over heavily guarded fences into gasoline storage areas or munition stockpiles. It even calls for infiltration into the National Guard units, revolutionaries posing as non-militants for the purpose of getting free military training and for gaining access to critical military supplies and heavy weapons.
Chapter 5. Destroying the Opposition. No small amount of support of the communist cause came from important and influential Negro newspapers. The late Robert Minor, atop Red, wrote,
In some of these papers repeatedly appear open admissions that the Communist Party is the only party that advocates or fights for equal rights for Negroes and the right of self-determination for the Negro people.
He cited two of many examples of this reaction of the Negro press. Because of lack of space, I shall quote only 3 excerpts from one of his examples.
No menacing Reds.
From Afro-American Baltimore.
The Reds are going our way. Like ourselves, they represent a feared and hated cause. They are the first white group since emancipation to advocate race, social equality, and intermarriage for those who wish it. In fact, there is more real Christianity among white communists than in the white YMCA. The white Christian Endeavor Societies, or the white so-called Christian churches. The Reds are no menace to Negroes. In fact, it is comforting to find groups of such people as communists in this color-mad world.
There were also Negro intellectuals, artists, professionals, politicians, etc., seeking a ladder to success. They are used according to the strategic needs of the Communist Party. In preparation for their treacherous role, the party passes along the word covertly or openly to give them preferred treatment. Forces, money, publicity, etc. are used in the build-up to change comparative Negro unknowns into national and international race leaders. Wires were pulled in local, state, and federal governments to appoint, upgrade, and transfer to strategic positions Negroes whom the communist apparatus could use. Congressional records show that an internationally prominent Negro was aided in his rise by Red spy Agler Hiss. We have never heard of this same Negro ever recommending any qualified member of his own race as a government appointee. The record does show that he recommended white appointees, later shown to be connected with the communist conspiracy. Take also the example of a well-known Negro federal judge who made 2 rulings in favor of the criminal communist conspiracy. He was known as a communist fronter before he was appointed. He is hailed in the red press and was boomed for the Supreme Court. In both instances, the long-range investment of the communists paid off. Similar examples can be cited again and again. As a result, belief has grown among Negro opportunists that if you want to get ahead, play ball with the Reds. Whenever the Reds do a successful job on a so-called renegade or militant anti-communist, it rivets tighter the conspiratorial cover of the party. To ensure this end, nothing is more enlightening than a few object lessons. The awesome spectacle of the array of forces in all walks of life, potent with ample money, cold-bloodedly and efficiently going about the job of destroying the reputation and influence of those designated as enemies of communism, keep many in line and enforce silence. And 2, the hand of the assassin is used in some instances where it can be done with impunity. Few men want the medicine the Reds gave to the late Senator Joseph McCarthy, which the Reds boast is the best cure for militant anti-communists. Also, among these at the top of the list of Red victims are George Hewitt, alias Timothy Tim Holmes, William Bill Noel, and Charles White, all murdered. They were Negro professional revolutionists, having received their training in the Lenin Institute in Moscow, USSR. Years of experience on all levels of the communist apparatus eminently qualified them for the task of ripping the conspiratorial cover from the Communist Party and exposing the flagitious plot against the Negro. When these Negroes defected, they automatically became a serious threat to the party. Their knowledge of the inner workings of the conspiracy made them a danger to the Red apparatus because they were beyond its power of discipline. Theirs was a sincere and total abandonment of communism. They knew of their own knowledge its dire threat to humanity, so they cooperated with all government agencies investigating, exposing, and prosecuting communists. As a result, they became enemies of the party apparatus, renegades of communism, and were treated like outcasts with every red hand against them. The National Disciplinary Commission of the Communist Party, feared and respected by all Reds, as an arm of the Soviet secret police, placed on these defectors the word informer, the dreaded tag of the criminal underworld. This solemn pronouncement means the full treatment to show the comrades what happens to those who desert and fight the party. So complete was the campaign of slander, threats, prosecution, social ostracism, that all the above-mentioned Negro ex-Reds were driven to an untimely grave. That this can happen in our republic under God is unbelievable, but true. No wonder then that today the wrath of the communists is to be more feared than judgments of heaven. To sink their claws in, subvert and use the Negro people, Moscow must have loyal, dedicated, trained Negro professional revolutionists who can be easily manipulated, that is, made to follow the party line. Loyalty is placed first because the Communist Party leaders demand that loyalty to the party be placed above and before everything, and that includes race, relatives, family, and loved ones. It entails a complete surrender of the will to the communist hierarchy. A willingness to do anything, go anywhere, and say anything you are told is a condition of communist membership. Out of the fires of such exacting indoctrination and training have come the treacherous Negro Red leaders who serve faithfully their masters in the Kremlin. The James Jacksons, the Henry Winstons, the William Pattersons, the Louise Thompsons, the Maud Whites, the Harry Haywoods, the Ben Davises, the Don Wilkinsons, the James W. Fords, etc., all make up the cadre around which the present racial conflict or liberation movement is being built. Moreover, they are the ones who devise the methods and techniques used by their puppets to destroy the reputation and influence of those who stand in the way of the gathering momentum of the Negro liberation juggernaut. Except for a brief period during the latter 1930s, the Reds called those persons Uncle Toms who sought solution of the race problem through the medium of education, patience, understanding, and discussion, which would lead to a mutual agreement. Since any program leading to a peaceful solution of the race problem automatically excludes and dooms the Reds' efforts among Negroes, it goes without saying that the Reds are going to oppose it. The chief targets are the responsible advocates of such a program. They must be discredited and isolated from the masses. So in addition to the tags of enemy of the race, tool of the white ruling class, traitor to the race, the Reds have added the opprobrium of Uncle Tom. In their usual diabolically clever way, the Reds took the name of a fine, sincere, and beloved character made famous in the greatest indictment of chattel slavery and transformed him into a dirty, low, sneaky, treacherous, groveling, snivering coward. This the Reds did in order to make the name Uncle Tom the symbol of social, economic, and political leprosy. Today, the name Uncle Tom among Negroes ranks with the term McCarthyism, generally turning many ministers into moral cowards, many politicians into scared jackrabbits, and other leaders into hypocrites. No man dare stand up and proclaim convictions counter to the Red agitation without running the risk of being pilloried. The Reds, their fellow travelers, leaders of the NAACP, and other race agitators have created an ideal climate for such persecution. Ironically, the communist definition of Uncle Tom applies to the Negro Red and the fellow traveler more than it does to anyone else. In fact, I do not know of any Negro living or dead who sank to the depths of cowardice, servility, and treachery as has the Negro Red. One has only to read the wailings and lamentations of Pettis Perry to his white masters in the Communist Party to do something about the widespread race prejudice permeating that party from top to bottom. Such prejudice in the Communist Party, in the opinion of Pettis Perry, prevents the communist apparatus from effectively exploiting the Negro people.
Now, here is a piece of vicious communist propaganda that perhaps some of you have seen. It's called The Crusader. It's written by Robert F. Williams, one of the organizers of the Revolutionary Action Movement. In this issue of The Crusader, the communists call not only for extensive chaos within the cities, but for putting to the torch every village, every forest, every field, and every barn. The plan is for raging fires from one city to the next. The reason? Well, first, there's the value of sheer destruction. Secondly, it would force us to deploy our defenses and rescue units over the widest possible area. The communists point out that as long as our police and National Guard remain concentrated, they're invincible. But if they can be forced to spread out over the entire city and into the countryside as well, then they can be picked off from ambush one by one. And the third value of massive fire to the communists is psychological. The average American, they say, soft and decadent, when he sees billows of black smoke rising from one horizon to the other, when at night the only light he has to see by is the flickering red from flames leaping into the sky, he'll become paralyzed with fear and panic. He'll run away and hide and do nothing to interfere with the guerrilla bands as they strike at the community's power centers.
Chapter 6. The Real Uncle Toms. Ironically, after more than 3 decades, the Reds can't eliminate race prejudice from their own ranks. Pettis Perry's articles clearly show that the centuries-old racial, national, social, economic, and political differences between peoples plague and bedevil the communist vanguard despite indoctrination, training, discipline, and so forth. The human element resists the red straitjacket. Naturally so, because you can't level everybody off, toss them in a pot, and stir them up without producing a social disorder. The top white communist leaders know that racial, as well as other differences between peoples, have existed for over a long span of years and will continue to exist even after centuries of re-education under communist rule. They also know that these differences can be used to play race against race, nationality against nationality, class against class, etc., to advance the cause of communism. Posing as a friend of the Negro, they, under this guise of a campaign for Negro rights, set race against race in the cold-blooded struggle for power. Their hypocrisy and falsity of their claims are clearly revealed in a number of instances. For example, while the Reds and their fellow travelers were stoking the racial fires on the issue of restrictive covenants,
and New York, some 46 comrades, including the chairman, signed leases containing restrictive covenant clauses. This was also true of 2 leading comrades in the trade union movement. Some comrades said that those involved needed a home and therefore it was all right for them to sign such clauses.
While the Reds were renting apartments and subletting them to Negroes to stir up racial bitterness and hate, such as existed in Stuyvesant Town in New York City, they carefully avoided living in a Negro community. A top white Red was in the act of moving into the Riverton housing project in Harlem, but decided against it because, to quote him,
a survey disclosed that only 5 to 7% of the inhabitants of the project were white families, and therefore would have been a bad environment for my kids.
The white communists have nothing but contempt for Negro communists, and justly so, and this is openly expressed. For instance, white comrades living in a Negro community and holding positions in the clubs were not on speaking terms with most of the Negro comrades. Their utter hypocrisy is also revealed in the following. White comrades going into the mass organizations made up predominantly of Negro people constantly shout that we must fight for Negro rights, yet when they meet Negro comrades and other Negro acquaintances on the street, especially in the downtown area, they do not even speak to them. Evidently, fear and distrust of the Negro male is rampant in the Communist Party ranks because when the newspapers reported a case of rape, some of the white women in the party began to develop the idea that they should ask for police protection. Even the despised tools of the capitalist system, the police, are good to have around at times, say the comrades. From time to time, the communist leaders conduct a complete registration of all members. Any Negro comrade who does not register is told to do so or else. The else means loss of job, as for instance,
in New Jersey, there was difficulty in re-registering a Negro woman comrade, whereupon this comrade was informed that either she re-register or else it will be your job,
thus implying
that the party would use its influence to carry out the threat.
Social equality for the Negro is a major slogan of the communists. They use it on one hand to mislead the Negro American, and on the other hand to create anxieties and fears among white Americans to better exploit both racial groups. What it means when applied to communists is shown as follows. A number of instances, Negro comrades are not welcome into the homes of white comrades. In some cases, they are received early in the mornings when neighbors may think they are domestic workers, or are welcome at night when the neighbors of the white comrades might not see the Negro comrades at all. Space does not permit the citing of all of the many examples of the utter hypocrisy of the white communists, which show the vast gulf between what they say and what they do. These examples serve to bring into sharp focus the infamous treachery of the Negro Reds and their Negro fellow travelers and defenders. Moreover, it conjures up their own definition of Uncle Tom, which applies more to them than any other Negro. The Reds have deliberately twisted and warped the thinking of those intellectual pygmies who lead the Freedom by 63 campaign by sending them after quick solutions of a centuries-old problem that has never been solved anywhere in the world. Obvious, even to the most ignorant, is the fact that all people are prejudiced. No one is free of it. Prejudice, in one form or another, has existed as long as the human family. They arise out of the complex differences of race, nationality, religion, economic, social, and cultural standings. Prejudice is not limited to any one race. It is common to all. Neither does the color of skin determine more or less the extent of prejudice in any particular race.
I want to be clear in how I characterize this. This is mostly a protest. It is not, generally speaking, unruly.
That ain't a riot, what we're seeing right now in Minneapolis.
They are strictly principled anti-fascists, and they've taken a principled stand to stand against white supremacists and white nationalists wherever they may show up.
I argue to you tonight, all punches are not equal. Morally.
It says it right in the name, Antifa, anti-fascism, which is what they were there fighting. Listen, there's, no organization is perfect. There was some violence.
Any reasonable person would say we shouldn't be destroying other people's property, but these are not reasonable times.
But thank goodness for the looters, man.
And please, show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
I don't care that much about statues.
Shouldn't that be done by a commission or the city council, not a mob in the middle of the night throwing it into the harbor?
People will do what they do.
What you're seeing behind me is one of multiple locations that have been burning in Kenosha, Wisconsin.
Do not get it twisted and think that, this is some
something that has never happened before, and then this is so terrible, and where are we, and these savages and all of that. This is how this country was started.
People get mad and people get sick of it. People are risking COVID to explain to this country that we're fed up.
Most of the major movements in American history have started at the grassroots level and at some point have turned into direct conflict with American government. So remember your history before you judge your present.
Thuggishness is thuggishness wherever it comes from politically, and we should be the first to call it out.
I disagree.
Chapter 7. Creating Hate. The red propagandists distort the facts concerning all racial differences for ulterior motives. All the right is not on the Negro side, neither is all the wrong. The same holds true in regard to the white man's side. The repository of good or evil is not to be found in any particular race. Black men are just as good or as bad as white men. Yellow men are just as good or bad as brown or red. It ill behooves anyone to speak about the other. White men sold white men as slaves. Black men sold black men as slaves. Black rulers are no more humane than yellow, red, or white rulers. Neither are they less brutal. The placing of the repository of everything right and just among the darker races is a dastardly communist trick to use race as a means of grabbing and enslaving the whole of humanity. Moscow's Negro tools in the incitement of racial warfare place all the ills of the Negro at the door of the white leaders of America. Capitalism and imperialism are made symbols of oppressive white rule in keeping with instructions from the Kremlin. To one familiar with red trickery, it is obvious that placing the blame for all the Negro's ills at the doors of the white leaders in America is to remove all responsibility from the Negro. This tends to make the Negro A. feel sorry for himself, B. blame others for his failures, C. ignore the countless opportunities around him, D. jealous of the progress of other racial and national groups, E. expect the white man to do everything for him, F. look for easy and quick solutions as a substitute for the harsh realities of the competitive struggle to get ahead. The result is a persecution complex, a warped belief of the white man's prejudices, the white man's system, the white man's government is responsible for everything. Such a belief is the way the Reds plan it, for the next logical step is hate that can be used by the Reds to accomplish their ends. In their campaign against the white leaders in America, the Reds are careful to point out that this does not apply to the white leaders of Russia and their counterparts in America. This creates the illusion that the white communists are different, that they are the friends and champions of the Negroes. This is the same sucker bait the Reds used to win and use millions of white peoples now under the whiplash of Soviet tyranny. They took the Soviet road to freedom only to find it a snare and a delusion. The fact that the Reds have never contributed anything tangible to the progress of the Negro is overlooked, though the Reds have collected millions of dollars as a result of race incitement. Like the Communist Party, the NAACP has collected millions of dollars through exploitation of race issues. The bigger the race issue, the bigger the appeal, and the bigger the contributions. Last year, according to Roy Wilkins, the NAACP had the greatest financial year in its history. Yet, one cannot find any report of any of this money being spent for factories and shops to provide jobs, land and home construction, specialized training for talented youth, hospitals, convalescent homes, classes in sanitation and personal hygiene, care and upkeep of property, combating crime and juvenile delinquency, centers to aid Negro youth in preparing to meet stiff employment competition in science and industry. It is then no accident that the NAACP is dubbed the National Association for the Agitation of Colored People. The record speaks for itself. Millions for agitation, not 1 cent for those things that win the respect and acclaim of other races and national groups. The NAACP set up the situation that erupted into racial violence at Little Rock, Arkansas. Reds all over the world dramatized the racial incidents created in Little Rock as examples of how white Americans resort to extremes of racial violence to deny Negroes an education. Every communist party in Asia and Africa, it seems, was alerted to do a job on America. At the same time, here at home, they were screaming about the damage to our prestige abroad. Any way you look at it, it is a two-way pincer movement against Uncle Sam. Therefore, we may readily assume that any damage done to our prestige abroad should be at the feet of the NAACP and the Reds who started the trouble. What is significant is that those who spread the lie that violence erupted because Negro children are denied an education have not repudiated it. Any confusion or misunderstanding created abroad has not been cleared up by the NAACP leadership. At no time have they admitted that no Negro in the United States is denied an education. And two, they have not admitted that not every Negro wants an education for reasons better known to himself. That accounts for many Negroes not being able to read or write. Moreover, there are free schools open both day and night for those who want an education. There are Negro institutions of higher learning and integrated ones based upon geographical lines that make available the highest type of training for those Negroes who seek it. There are special scholarships and funds created by white philanthropists that enable Negroes to attend the finest universities and colleges in the country. What is ironic is that most of the Negro leaders responsible for the incitement of racial violence have been the recipients of the scholarships and grants. They possibly would have been cotton pickers or bootblacks were it not for this aid, because only this aid gave them the free time to plot the destruction of America. One can very well question the sincerity of the Reds and the NAACP when they try to create the impression that America in general, and the South in particular, is a hellhole of despotism where the Negro is concerned. This is so, since the whole issue boils down to taking Negro children out of one school and transferring them to another, so that they can be seated with white children on the assumption that only in this way will the Negro child get an education. What is really being implied is that the 113,000 Negro teachers in Southern schools are inferior, incompetent, and unable to properly teach the children of their own race. Since it is no longer made a question of better schools, better facilities, and equal pay, it is a question of liquidation of the Negro school and the Negro teacher under the guise of integration. Naturally, white parents are going to resist any attempt to force them to send their children to a school on an integrated basis when Negro teachers are considered unfit by members of their own race. Maybe this is the reason why hundreds of Negro teachers were fired in the border and southern states where there was token integration. It is also implied that a Negro child is handicapped in his studies unless he is sitting beside a white child. What could be more nonsensical or ridiculous? It is a sad commentary on the ability of the Negro child to say that he cannot properly study, or that he will develop harmful complexes if he does not sit beside a white child. By what quirk of reasoning does one conclude that sitting beside a white child will help a Negro child make the grade? Experience shows that a student's success is determined by how much attention, time, and effort he is willing to put into his studies. In New York, for example, many Negro junior high and high school graduates are outrageously poor in spelling, writing, reading, and mathematics, yet they attend integrated schools. Even the report of the Public Education Association in 1955 admitted that Southern Negro children moving to New York City are on a level 2 grades higher than those in New York City schools. What is also important to remember is that the late Dr. George W. Carver, the outstanding Negro scientist, was born of slave parentage. He did not learn to read or write until he was 20. He worked his way through school to become one of the world's greatest scientists. He didn't even have the opportunities of young Negroes today. Every difficulty was a challenge, so he had no time to develop complexes. The main danger and handicap to the Negro is not the Southern school, but the persecution and hate complex the NAACP and the Reds are trying to create.
And then, finally, Robert Williams says this: any all-out minority revolution must create a state of crisis wherein almost all of the male population would be forced to remain in their homes to protect their property and families. The middle class is very large, but it is not accustomed to deprivation and terror. Because of its affluence, it has waxed soft. It has no stomach for massive fire, blood, and violence. The motive force behind its life drive is its endless pursuit of prestige, conspicuous consumption, and sensual pleasure. A few years of violent, sporadic, and highly destructive uprisings will set the stage for the grand finale. After the stage is properly set through protracted struggle, America could be brought to her knees in 90 days of highly organized, fierce fighting, sabotage, and massive firestorm. Ladies and gentlemen, the plans and preparations for a communist revolution of force and violence are far advanced. The organization behind these preparations has almost unlimited financial resources, and it provides both training and leadership. based upon years of experience in many other countries. Our enemies are deadly serious about their task, and it's nothing short of national suicide for us to continue to ignore their plans and their progress. The violent revolution becomes of primary value to the communists to the extent to which it can be used to condition the masses psychologically to accept the non-violent revolution, which is offered supposedly as the only alternative. Hoping to avoid further violence and bloodshed, the public is to be pressured into accepting measures that will move the country gradually and legally toward communism, but without calling it that. The strategy of the proletarian revolution calls for the quiet conversion of our government into a communist regime, but under the banner of socialism.
Chapter 8. Modern-day carpetbaggers. At the root of all the present racial trouble is interference in the internal affairs of southern states by people not at all interested in the amicable settlements of any problems arising between Negro and white Americans. This interference comes from organizations and individuals in the North seeking to use the Negro. Among them are found communists, crypto-communists, fuzzy-headed liberals, eggheads, pacifists, idealists, civil disobedience, advocates, socialists, do-gooders, conniving politicians, self-seekers, muddle-headed humanitarians, addle-brained intellectuals, crackpots, and plain meddlers. Like missionaries, they descend on the South ostensibly to change or alter it to benefit the Negro. In fact, and in implication, all of them seek to bypass the responsible white and Negro leaders in the South to effect a solution. They employ a pattern of setting up provocative situations which inflame and agitate the white populace, and then using it as propaganda here and abroad against the South in particular, and all of America in general. White Southerners who oppose these missionaries are pronounced upon and labeled race baiters, reactionaries, Ku Kluxers, white supremacists, persons outside of the law, and so forth. Negro Southerners who oppose these missionaries are also attacked and labeled Uncle Toms, traitors of the race, handkerchief heads, white folk niggers, and so forth. Obviously, such name-calling is a deliberate attempt on the part of these missionaries to scuttle all the progress made by the Negroes since slavery by creating an atmosphere of distrust, fear, and hate. Like a witch stirring her brew, the missionaries stir up all the sectional and racial bitterness that arose in the wake of the Civil War and Reconstruction. They open old wounds. They thumb the pages of closed chapters. They rake over the dying embers of old grudges, old grievances, old fears, and old hates that time has been gradually consigning to history in the onward sweep of a young, lusty, healthy, and growing nation. Labeling opponents as a speciality of the Reds. Smear as a cardinal technique. Any label found in the red stockpile, you may be sure, is carefully made and selected to draw the maximum hate to the person or persons of the group or organization to which it is attached. The use of such labels has a tendency to divide America. Nothing, in my opinion, would please the aforementioned wired assortment of missionaries more than a divided America unless it is a Soviet America. They are forever predicting it at the same time working tirelessly to bring it about. Moreover, while they talk about racial strife in America as providing grist for Moscow's propaganda mill, they are busy creating it. They are careful to hide the fact that they are responsible for the provocations of extremists, as was the case in Little Rock. In all red propaganda here and abroad, such acts of extremists are made the symbol of the treatment of the Negro in America. It is also a red smear pot in which all opponents of the forthwith solution of the race problem are tossed. The fact is that the majority of white Southerners are opposed to extremists. All white Southern juries have convicted some of them as troublemakers, and white Southern judges have sentenced some of them to long prison terms. This is deliberately ignored or played down by the leftists. James P. Mitchell, Secretary of Labor, reported that the Department of Labor in a recent survey found that purchasing power of the Negroes was more than $17 billion and that a third of the Negro population owned their homes. Negro wage earners, he said, make 4.5 times what they earned in 1940. He listed important gains by Negroes in ownership of banks, insurance companies, businesses, civil service employment, and professional, skilled crafts and clerical and sales fields. In education, he said, Negro college enrollments have increased at a rate 6 times that of white students, while more than 98% of Negroes between the age of 7 and 13 are in school. These facts, too, are ignored or played down by the leftist missionaries and irresponsible crusaders. And political warfare, it seems, a cardinal principle to credit your enemy with only that which will hasten the build-up for his destruction. The media of public information is far from free of communists and fellow travelers who operate under the guise of liberalism. They are ready at all times to do an effective smear job. Among these red tools may be found editorial writers, columnists, news commentators, and analysts in the press, radio, and television. They go overboard in giving top news coverage to racial incidents fomented by the leftists, and also those incidents that are interpreted so as to show biased attitudes of whites against Negroes. This is a propaganda hoax aimed not at helping the Negro, but casting America in a bad light in order to destroy its prestige and influence abroad, thereby aiding Soviet Russia in the penetration and conquest of Asia and Africa. In the meantime, the Negro is a sacrificial lamb, the innocent victim of the widespread racial hate which the leftists are creating. The energizing of race hate is an asset to the red cause. The more, the merrier, so long as it erupts in cross-burnings, threats, loss of jobs, refusal of loans, boycotts, bombings, fistfights, beatings, and shootings. Thus, all progress based upon understanding, goodwill, friendship, and mutual cooperation built up painfully over the years is wiped out. White Americans are set against Negro Americans and vice versa. The stage is thus set for the opening of a dark and bloody era in Negro and white relations. Many white northern politicians objectively aid the rapidly deteriorating racial situation through the exploitation of leftist propaganda to garner Negro votes. They care not a tinker's damn about the southern Negro and simply flatter the northern Negro whom they consider a gullible fool. Getting elected and re-elected is their only concern. Dishonorable mention should also be given to those white individuals and racial groups posing as friends of the Negro, only to use him as a spearhead to attain certain objectives. They constitute in no small way the financial sinews of the movement. Naturally, they project programs and policies on those Negro tools who live off of their legacy. Since he who pays the piper calls the tune, could anything less than full submission be expected by those so-called Negro leaders? It does not matter to what extent Negro Americans generally feel the brunt of the racial hostility which these harmful programs engender, so long as the so-called Negro leaders win the approbation of their white masters and the money keeps rolling in. Significantly, among all the aforementioned groups and individuals, there is only one highly organized, trained, and disciplined force, and that is the communists. So they are able to use, manipulate, and combine this weird assortment of leftist missionaries in one way or another to bring about a social upheaval which will plow up Southern institutions to their roots. Indeed, the spectra of the modern carpetbaggers haunts the South. Reds, NAACPers, do-gooders, and other missionaries follow in the footsteps of those Northerners who for narrow, selfish, personal, or political reasons meddled in the affairs of the South in the period immediately following the Civil War. Like their predecessors, these modern-day carpetbaggers create only mischief, for they have no true interest in the South. A check of the record for these modern-day carpetbaggers will show that most of them are either communists or persons who have been or are now associated with the communists' cause as a fronter, endorser, or fellow traveler. Under the circumstances, it becomes the bounden duty of every government agency in the interest of internal security to reveal to the American people the record of each individual, regardless of race, creed, religion, position, or rank, who is involved in inciting white and Negro Americans against each other. Naturally, the opponents of the publication of such information are going to scream louder than 10,000 pigs caught under a fence. Charges of anti-Negro, anti-democratic bias will fill the air. Old man Smear will have a field day. In this way, as in the past, any real investigation of communism or pro-communism among Negroes is headed off, defeated, or driven into a blind alley. Color and race thus becomes a sanctuary. On the one hand, patriotic and honest politicians and officials do not dare invade it critically without dire consequences to their personal reputations. On the other hand, this same sanctuary becomes the playground, not only of the Reds, but of the hypocrites, demagogues, bigots, self-seekers, opportunists, conniving politicians, and other dregs of human society. Too few Americans in our day have the courage of their convictions. Too few will fly in the face of leftist opposition. Too few will stand up for truth in the face of the ominous and destructive storm of Me Tooism, or the communist ideological regimentation that hangs like a pall over our country. Many take the attitude that it is better to be safe than sorry, or conclude after little difficulty or several reverses that if you can't beat 'em, join 'em. The words God, country, and posterity have lost much of their substance and are becoming only a shadow in the hearts and minds of many Americans. Great Negro Americans such as Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver should leave both as an inspiration and a reminder to the present and successive generations of Negro Americans that they too can make their lives sublime and in departing leave behind them footprints in the sands of time. The great surge of progress of the Negro since slavery can be largely traced to the work and efforts of these two men, their supporters, their emulators, and their followers. Theirs was a deep and abiding pride of race, a firm belief in the ability of their benighted people to rise above their past and eventually stand on an equal plane with all the other races. Moreover, equality was to them not just a catchword, the prattle of fools, but a living thing to be achieved only by demonstrated ability.
The people that run this country have no allegiance to this country, people. They have allegiance to the bank. These people don't care about the country. They destroy countries for fun. Why? It destroys the middle class, which is what Karl Marx wanted, creates a large lower class. And what does a large lower class do? They become obedient. I'm not joking around when I throw around that term slavery. It might not come back around like you saw it back in the day. It'll just be a modern form. You see, what they realized was if you can make the slave comfortable, it's easier to keep them docile and obedient. And that's what they've done this year, last year, and still this year. They've figured out, oh, these people are comfortable. They're never going to buck against the system. We can make them do whatever we want to do. We'll shut down their business. Meanwhile, Walmart, Target, Amazon, all these Whole Foods, all these large corporations get to stay open. But you couldn't, America. Why? Because the commies run this country and they have no allegiance to it. They want to destroy the middle class. They want a slave class and they want them and they want to rule over us like cattle.
Chapter 9. Race pride is passé. The Negro businessman has always been a chief target of the Reds. They despise him because of his conservatism. They label him a tool of the white imperialists and an enemy of the Negro masses. Such labels are reserved for those the Reds plan to liquidate, since the Negro businessman is an inspiration and example to other Negroes to take advantage of the countless opportunities of the free enterprise system. He is therefore an object of derision by communists. An enthusiastic response of the Negro to the appeal and opportunities for Negro business is a cardinal bulwark against communism. Consequently, the Reds seek to discredit, discourage, and liquidate Negro business. Only during the period of the Popular Front did the Reds cease their attack on Negro business in order to link the Negro banker, broker, realtor, businessman, merchant, lawyer, physician, preacher, worker, and farmer with Bolshevism under the guise of a National Negro Congress. Basically, the Reds' policy is now, and always has been, anti-Negro business. The fact that Negro business is sustained in the main by Negro patronage, that it exists almost entirely in the Negro community, makes it vulnerable to attacks by the Reds. They term it a product of segregation, social isolation, the ghetto, etc. And two, the Reds use the example of sharp competition between small and big business to discourage Negro entry into the general arena. While it is true that Negro businesses in only a few instances function outside of the Negro community, this does not mean that they cannot function in other areas if the Negro provides attractive goods or services. But what is wrong with the Negro owning and operating community business? The Germans, the Italians, the Irish, the Jews, the Chinese have their respective communities where they own and operate most of the businesses. At no point in time do they consider it as a crime. Chinatown in New York and San Francisco are splendid examples of the community resourcefulness and pride that draw, like a magnet, multitudes from all walks of life. The Negro can learn much from the Chinese. I recently attended a luncheon at the Hotel New Yorker in New York City, sponsored by a very fine and cultured group of Negro ladies. We were served in a private dining room by white waiters and waitresses. There was not a single white person present except the hotel employees. Yet these Negroes considered this integration. Any one of a number of Negro charters could have supplied the same service. What is more important is that a large sum paid to this hotel could have helped develop and expand a Negro catering service. Other races have such services which are not considered integrated. Yet the Negro bitten by the integration bug is so naive that he thinks that boycotting his own race and spending his money in a place where he is unwanted and isolated is putting his own best foot forward. One of the officers of the group said, "It's good to be seen in such places," as if some special honor had been conferred upon her. She was so carried away with the fact that she could walk through the lobby of a white hotel to a private, segregated dining room that had I suggested that it did not mean acceptance, I would have made an enemy. Other members waxed eloquent in their praise of those responsible for the decision to hold our annual luncheon in white hotels because it leads towards integration. How I'll never understand. Nobody paid any attention to our coming. They had seen Negroes before. We were not too hard to be seen nor identified. We left the same way. There was no welcome mat, no enthusiastic reception. To me, it seemed that the employees and management were glad to get rid of us. The disastrous effect of integration, so ardently advocated by the Reds and the NAACP, is evident in the following article. Negro businessmen disturbed. Negro businessmen, such as hotel owners, tavern operators, and sellers of cooked food, are up in the air in some cities because Negro money is bypassing their cash registers and falling into the pockets of white proprietors who run choice spots in downtown areas. This is especially true in the convention cities of Detroit and Miami. Detroit businessmen on the Negro side raised quite a howl a few months back when all Negro female conclave hit town and none of the delegates as much as looked through the doors of Negro-operated businesses. They slept in white-owned hotels, conveyed in white convention rooms, ate in white dining rooms, drank at white bars, and danced in white ballrooms. Owners and operators of Negro businesses in Miami, Florida were quite angry last year after the African Methodist Episcopal Church General Conference packed up and got out of town. They claimed AME delegates, and there were hundreds of them, spent their money with white hotels on Miami Beach and even took their meals in Miami Beach restaurants. Negro taxicab drivers were pretty hot too. Not too far back, Negro cab drivers chased a white cab driver out of Miami's Negro area because he was riding a Negro passenger. Somebody down in Miami must have talked to officials of the Church of God in Christ before they held their International Youth Congress there last week. Because the conference was held in a Negro church, delegates lived in Negro hotels, ate in colored dining rooms, and held their banquets in big rooms made available by Negro hotels. They even held an open-air festival at the all-Negro Virginia Beach just out of Miami. Betrayal of the Negro people may well come through communist corruption of the Negro intellectual. This is not so difficult since the communists, the white liberals, and the white progressives do the thinking for most of them. The utter bankruptcy of the Negro intelligentsia is startlingly evident by reason of the absence of any strong and dramatic movement for genuine Negro organization, leadership, and thinking. Deep in the swamp of inferiority, lack of ability, muddled thought, the Negro intelligentsia looks to the phony white liberals, politicians, and progressive hypocrites for leadership, guidance, and money. These whites are carriers of isms other than Americanism, which spreads like an epidemic in the ranks of the hapless Negro intellectuals. Due to the lack of race pride, there is no immunity.
Well, what is socialism? All right, let's define it. According to the dictionary, socialism is a political concept based upon the principle of government ownership and control of property, the means of production, and the avenues of commerce. Under socialism, those who run the government, and the communists are confident that in America they eventually will be the ones who do so, those who run the government will know who is to get something and who has to wait, and that represents control over human beings. What has all this to do with the communist revolution in America? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it has everything to do with it because the building of socialism is the communist revolution in America. It represents the process whereby our country can be moved gradually toward communism without the people even being aware of it. No matter what grievance we may have, real or imagined, no matter what national problems we may face, the communists seize upon these as excuses to build socialism. They have one and only one solution for all problems: more government, and then more and more until it's total government. And forgive me for saying it one more time, total government is communism.
Chapter 10. Wisdom Needed. All other racial and national groups have their respective organizations. No Negro belongs to any of these organizations, nor is his membership sought or welcome. Moreover, no Negro is called upon to decide what is best for any one of these groups. What is most important is that no one of these groups considers itself segregated because no Negro belongs, is invited, nor has his opinion sought. Yet the Negro intellectual contends that to get together as Negroes, to discuss common problems as Negroes, to decide what is best for Negroes without white participation is segregation. Such an attitude speaks for itself. It is a hangover from slavery when the Negro had to depend on the master for everything necessary for his well-being. At the same time, it proves that no proclamation of emancipation is capable of freeing those who do not wish to be free. The Negro intelligentsia, by far and large, is physically free, but mentally a slave. After nearly a century removed from chattel slavery, they are unwilling and incapable of throwing off their slave psychology. Reds and political charlatans of all shades, aware of this fact, find the Negro intellectual easy prey. Fundamentally, there is deep racial consciousness among Negro Americans. They have, in spite of the divisive influence of the Negro intellectual, the same instinctive urge to group together as have other racial and national groups. They desire progress through the medium of education, reliability, know-how, and productivity, all so essential in competitive society. They know that to hold a comparable job, they must be just as good, and in most instances, better, though a number of Negro intellectuals try to convince them that the cry of discrimination is a good substitute. Furthermore, they know that a number of Negroes developed skills during the war, but that the great majority are not highly skilled or trained to fit into industry during this atomic age. Thanks to W.E.B. Du Bois and Monroe Trotter for their indefatigable toil to defeat the industrial training program of Booker T. Washington, which would have made the Negro an indispensable part of American industry. Booker T. Washington's philosophy of education was to prepare the majority of Negroes through vocational training to play a vital role in the rapidly developing American economy before and after the turn of the century. He undoubtedly saw the process of industrialization, the ensuing demand for trained, qualified personnel, i.e., skilled tradesmen who could be relied upon to do a job efficiently and well. Such training would enable the Negro to maintain his favored position after slavery and place him in a better competitive position against immigrants in the labor market. He stressed pride of race, home ownership, land ownership, along with industrial and agricultural training. Leftists Du Bois and Monroe Trotter bitterly assailed this philosophy. Consequently, most Negro youths avoided skilled trades as menial. According to Mr. Carter G. Woodsum, the vacuum was filled by white immigrant labor. Many Negroes realized that Du Bois was wrong then, as he is today, in his attempt to steer them down the road to communism. Further, the average Negro realizes that his happiness and well-being are not served to him on a silver platter, but come as a result of hard work and difficult struggle. He therefore seeks 1. Practical solutions to all his problems, and 2. A way to get along with other Americans with the least possible friction. Sagely, he realizes that a man cannot live constantly in the miasmic fog of race hostility without stifling to death, nor can he live fighting all other Americans all the time. On the other hand, the vociferous Negro intellectuals, along with the Reds, through their impractical, unrealistic alien behavior, turn race relations into shambles. Every Negro who opposes integration in the NAACP becomes a traitor or an Uncle Tom. Every white person taking a similar stand is branded a criminal and outside of the law. The fact that courts have been known to reverse themselves and that under our system of government, every American has the right to protest and oppose any rule considered onerous or prejudicial is ignored. Stupidly, they go about their business of forcing everybody to conform or be damned, thus building up fires of resentment that will require the work of centuries to extinguish. Already, under the guise of struggling for Negro rights, they have created all the explosive material for racial violence by making impossible demands, resisting sane and just decisions, opposing compromise and adjustment, and demanding that everything must be done forthwith or not at all. They have no love for their own people. They have no love for America. Naturally, they get the Kremlin's support and approval. Feeling frustrated and inferior, they run to communism and civil disobedience in their folly. They play Moscow's game, and they deserve whatever red reward that is due them. Knowledge is power. Share these recordings of history with people you know, and people who need to know. Thanks for tuning in, and if you like my work, please consider supporting my series and buying a deck of cards from my store La Loteria Loca.